We are here today to talk about legal project management. And I wanted to start really by just telling you all a little bit of a story because I think sometimes these techniques that we hear a lot about in the legal industry, particularly like project management, we know they're important, but we undersell the impact that they can potentially make in our relationships. And so this is a story that shows you just how important a role it can play in your relationships with clients. So this was about 2 years ago. BTI was working with an AmLaw 200 firm, and we were working on a client feedback initiative. And part of the project was the firm had asked us to interview a specific client of theirs. The firm had noticed that the billings were falling off, particularly after a matter where there was a successful win, which naturally this seemed a little odd to the firm. So the firm wanted me to go in, talk to the client, find out what was really happening there. And so before I went and talked to the client, I asked for a little background into the client and the relationship. And so the relationship partner explained to me that one day this general counsel of the company had reached out to the firm. And this was after an OSHA inspection at one of their major manufacturing plants. And the inspection had not gone all that well. Now, without getting into sort of too much of the technical details, basically what had happened was it was discovered that the employees at this facility, they had made a modification to the machinery in order to make it run faster. But this modification resulted in multiple safety violations across thousands of machines. And so this ended up totaling close to $1 million in proposed fines. Not to mention, of course, it was also going to threaten to shut down the facility operations. Now, for those of you who are familiar with this type of work, you know these types of matters are under extremely tight deadlines. You typically have something like 15 days to get into compliance or pay OSHA's fines. So as soon as the client and the attorney hung up, the attorney jumped right into the work. 10 days later, the attorney calls the client back, is able to tell the GC that he got the penalty reduced to about a $100,000 fine, as long as the company also implemented a mandatory training program for its employees. Now, more importantly, there were also going to be no interruptions in the client's business operations. So they're on the phone. GC says, "Great, thanks for handling this. Let's talk soon." Client and the attorney hang up the phone. Both move on to the next burning issue on their respective plates. Now we're going to fast forward about 2 months later. The attorney receives a call from the client and the client's CFO, and they were, shall we say, a little less than thrilled. That morning, they had received the invoice for the matter, and they had a lot of questions. And the biggest and the loudest question was, how the hell did the bill manage to come to $100,000, and how did it get this high when there were only 20 line item entries on the invoice that all were labeled as meeting time? So the attorney now spent an hour and a half going through the invoice line by line with the CFO and the GC, grilling the partner on who each meeting was with, what exactly was talked about in each meeting, and what did they accomplish by having each of the meetings. By the end of the call, everyone's tone, as you can probably imagine, was a little bit on the shorter side, and the attorney ended up writing 10% of the invoice off to try and smooth the client's obviously rumpled feathers. So this is an example of a poorly managed matter. The GC of this company should have been singing this attorney's praises, and instead they were left questioning the value and the work that the attorney did. And I will tell you, there were plenty of opportunities for the attorney to have better managed the project that would have left the client thrilled, and the firm wouldn't have had to write off any of the invoice. Now, there's a bit of an epilogue here. We ended up working with the firm and the client. We were able to repair the relationship, but again, this was an issue that should have been avoided in the first place, particularly if some basic principles of legal project management had been used. And so that's going to be the majority of today's conversation and what I'm going to focus on. What could and should have been done at various points throughout this matter in order to avoid what this firm had gone through. Now, this story, which I told you, which is a true story, this is not a one-off situation. These types of problems are unfortunately a pretty common issue that's facing law firms today. Oh, and a quick note before we go further, I'm going to interchangeably use project management and legal project management. Legal project management is simply applying the concepts of project management to control legal matters. So they're not two different concepts, it's just we're applying it in this particular industry. And I want to be really clear right up front, I am not here today to turn you into formal certified project managers. This isn't really a crash course in official LPM. As attorneys, it really is next to impossible to incorporate what is considered all of the formal project management standards into your daily life. In most companies, a project manager is a standalone position. It is handled by a dedicated individual who isn't also performing the work. And this is clearly not the case in, I don't know, what, 98% of law firms. In law firms, attorneys, for the most part, are expected to be their own project managers. So what we're going to do today is we're going to borrow some best practices from the principles of project management, and I'm going to share some tactics that you can use to better manage your client relationships and how we can go about avoiding the fate of the law firm in the story that I told you at the very beginning. And hopefully everyone's sort of on board with this approach. I like to speak from a more tactical as opposed to a methodological standpoint. So the first tactic that we're going to focus on is having a project kickoff meeting with your clients. Now, a project or a matter kickoff meeting, this is one of the most effective client and matter management tools you can use. This meeting is the opportunity to get everyone who's involved in a matter on the same page at the very beginning of the matter so that nothing unintentionally goes off the rails. We all know legal matters are complex beasts. There's lots of moving parts. There's multiple objectives that we're trying to achieve all at the same time. And what we've learned is one of the most common reasons that clients end up ultimately dissatisfied with how a matter was managed is because not all of their objectives were met. So if we're going to do a simple example of this, it's going to be that story that we started with, in fact. So that firm had delivered the legal outcome that the client was looking for, but there was clearly a disconnect in what the client expected to pay and what was charged for the matter. And since the firm didn't meet that objective or manage the client's expectations on that objective, the matter ultimately was seen as unsuccessful in the client's mind. So these matter kickoff meetings, these are a way for you to ensure that you are set up for success in meeting all of the client's objectives. Now, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're not going to encounter any snags or changes in scope along the way. In fact, I can promise you that those things are going to happen. This kickoff meeting is just going to serve as the foundation to help you manage those unexpected surprises with far more ease and a lot less pushback from the client, which I hope is something that everybody is looking to get out of their client relationships. So let's talk a little bit about the details. What does this meeting really look like? What are you going to talk about with the client? What information do you need? So we'll start with the logistics. Logistically, we're looking at about an hour-long meeting. And this is for the first time that you hold one of these meetings with a client. So for matters moving forward, once you've conducted this initial project kickoff meeting, usually you can then do a quick confirmation of objectives, a review of client preferences in about half that time. But for the first time that you have one of these meetings with a client, and this is whether it's a new client or an existing client, you should expect to spend about an hour talking through all of the topics that we want to hit. Now, ideally, you would do this as a face-to-face meeting, but honestly, I've conducted a ton of meetings as teleconferences, video conferences. There's not really any major problems. So do whatever is easiest for the client. Do whatever you can make happen, because a lot of times you just can't physically get everybody in the same room to do this. So a teleconference is just the easiest way to manage that. Finally, on the logistics side, you want to make sure that you're inviting all of the core participants from both the firm and the client side. So it doesn't need to be every single individual who is going to be working on a matter. That's going to get way too overwhelming. You'll end up spending an hour and a half on introductions alone. But particularly on the firm side, if someone is going to be working enough hours to become a substantial line item at the end of a matter, it's always a really good idea for the client to meet them up front. Just to keep this in perspective, one of the primary goals and the benefits of using project management is that this helps make no surprises for the client. Clients hate surprises. And one surprise that clients hate the most is learning about someone who is working on their matter by reading about it on the invoice. So those are your basic logistics, but let's get into the content of this meeting. What exactly are you trying to learn? What questions do you even ask to get the information you need? And probably most importantly, what information are we going to be giving to the client in this meeting? Because this is a two-way street. We want to learn what the client's expecting, but we also want to manage those expectations and actively manage those expectations based on our expertise and our past experiences. Once you get the introductions out of the way, you really want to turn the floor over to the client. You're going to give them the opportunity to explain what it is they're looking for you to help them with. So these are the basics. You know, what does the matter entail? What are the business drivers for initiating this matter now? And what does success and failure look like from the client's perspective? And it's really important, I can't stress this enough, it is really important to make sure that you are having the client articulate these to you and to not make your own assumptions, because there are lots of ways clients define success, and you need to understand which metric or metrics they're giving the highest priority to. You know, we can take a litigation matter as an example here. There's lots of different reasons a client ultimately engages in a litigation, and they'll have many different measures of success, and those metrics are going to impact how you approach a matter and how the client measures your success on that matter. So let's say you have a client where they're in a situation where the company's entire viability is on the line based on the outcome of the matter. So this is going to be a defend at all cost litigation, right? And that's going to require an entirely different approach than if, say, you have a client where there's a litigation that they have to deal with, but one of the most important things to them is that you keep their name out of the press because, you know, maybe they recently had a hit to their stock price and any additional negative press is really going to make that worse. So we have two litigations. They're both litigation matters on our hands, but they're going to require two dramatically different approaches because you have very different business objectives for each of these matters. You know, both of these clients obviously want a positive legal resolution, but it's the business measures that they're going to be measuring your success against. So we really want to uncover these layers of objectives, and it's really critical to do that up front. And sometimes the client's going to share these outright with you, these objectives that they have. Other times, you're going to have to ask some smart questions to unearth these secondary objectives. And this is where you use your experience, use your understanding of the client's business, and you're going to have to take from working with similar clients or working on similar matters in the past, what were some of the business objectives that clients wanted to achieve? So you might ask, are things like privacy or uninterrupted business operations, if we're going to go to that first example I used, are those things important to the client? Where do they rest in priority in the client's mind in comparison to getting that positive legal outcome? Is resolution is that something they're willing to consider? So you really need to start asking some probing questions up front. And at this stage, just again to be clear, we're talking about information that can be known at the onset. I am completely aware that circumstances change in the middle of the matter. Now, on the slide here, you can see I have a number of questions that I recommend you ask during a kickoff meeting. I'm not going to read through every question. I wanted to give you the level of detail on these slides, so if you're reviewing these slides afterwards, you had some additional ideas that you could kick around. But for the sake of time, we're going to focus on some of the more important and unexpected questions. And the second question here on the slide, this one regarding the cost of failure, that's a critical question to ask because asking this question is going to define the client's risk threshold for this matter. And it's really important that you and the client are on the same page regarding how much risk the client is willing to take. In fact, at BTI in our independent research, we're seeing this come up more and more. As the marketplace gets more competitive, clients are willing to take on more risk than they have in the past. And what we're seeing is there's a number of clients who are in fact telling us that their firms are just not evolving to meet these new risk thresholds. And what they're doing is the clients are ultimately moving their work from old firms to new firms that are willing to take more risk and try different, sometimes unconventional approaches to a matter. So again, really important to confirm some of these questions that we have here. And I also want to point out, this is a meeting, So it shouldn't be treated as an interrogation by any stretch of the imagination. You know, this is also your opportunity for you to share your experiences as well. I think we talked a little bit about this before, but as the client's telling you their goals, you should be sharing, you know, the likelihood of success. What are the factors that are most going to impact whether or not a matter will resolve with the client's hoped for outcome? And I do want to warn you, this is a place where you want to pace yourself. You don't want to try and get too much into the weeds here. This is the time that we're going to talk only about the most pressing obstacles that we see and the most important drivers of success. We don't want the first instance of scope creep to occur in the middle of a meeting where we're supposed to be talking about managing scope. But the good news is a lot of this conversation should have probably happened already for many of you. So this goes a lot quicker than me sort of explaining all the ins and outs of it right now. But many times you've already talked to the client before the kickoff meeting about their objectives. They approached you with an RFP, or they picked up the phone and called you to tell you about this matter. So the kickoff meeting really is the chance for everyone else who's involved to just hear the client's thinking and also give the client the opportunity to refine any thinking that may have changed since that last time you talked to them, and quite frankly, 9 times out of 10, something has changed. We have some other important questions. Again, not going to spend too much time on these, but this is all about uncovering the client stakeholders, making sure that you understand all of the different expectations that are at play. This is kind of like our OSHA scenario. You know, we had the GC, but we also had the CFO closely watching how the matter was handled. CFO wasn't on the initial call, and so the attorney was taken a little off guard at the end when the CFO and the GC called him to talk about the invoice. But that's kind of the thing you want to get out up front. Who else is watching this? What are they watching for? How are they going to measure success? Finally, and this is again just in this first section where we're getting everything, all the information out on the table, it's really important to ask about sensitivities. And I literally ask this question straightforward when I'm working with clients on a project. I'll say, you know, are there any sensitivities we should be aware of as we start working on this project? And quite frankly, the type of information that you can learn from asking this question can vary quite a bit. So we had this one project where, you know, we learned that there was a major reorganization about to happen, but half the company didn't even know about it yet. So we had to keep a lot of the details of the project under wraps. They didn't want the wrong people getting the wrong information. So that was quite the unique situation that we were in. So, you know, you just ask the question up front and see what the client tells you, because you usually get some interesting tidbit that's going to just help you better manage and meet your client's expectations. You see my contact information here. I know a lot of this, you know, you're going to have to digest a lot of what I've told you today. Take a look through the slides for some of those additional details. Feel free to reach out to me.